Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede and welcome to Facing South Florida. Florida's new Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, had his first confirmation hearing this week where he failed to answer the most basic questions. He also argued masks don't work in protecting people from COVID, and when it came to vaccines, he continually avoided the question as to whether or not they are effective.
Do you believe vaccines work?
I consider vaccines in the same way that I consider other medical therapies.
Just a yes or no. Do vaccines work in fighting against COVID-19? Yes or no?
Senator, I as a scientist, I am compelled to answer the scientific question. And I'd be happy to answer any specific scientific question that you have related to vaccines and COVID-19.
Scientifically, do the vaccines work against preventing COVID-19? Yes or no?
Oh, thank you again, Senator. So, yes or no questions are not that easy to find in science.
The senator questioning him was Lauren Book from Broward. I spoke to her after the hearing about not only the Surgeon General, but also about how private and intimate images of her were stolen and traded on a black market within the web. This is her first television interview on what happened to her and how she is now fighting back. But we began with the frustration over the Surgeon General.
We were all very frustrated. At the end of the day, we were asking very pointed questions. My Senate colleagues and I came prepared to ask questions, not just about the COVID-19 pandemic, but real issues facing Floridians. And at many different points throughout the hearing, we all grew very frustrated. Very pointed, simple questions like, does the vaccine prevent hospitalizations? Does masking prevent the spread of COVID-19? And we were not given any straight answers from the Surgeon General. And I believe that 21 million Floridians deserve better in the top doctor in our state of Florida.
Now, eventually he did seem to get to a place where he acknowledged that vaccines are effective in terms of hospitalizations and death. It took a long time for you to pull that out of him. Why do you think he was so reluctant to just acknowledge that fact?
I think, unfortunately, Jim, this has become a very political position, which is extremely dangerous for Florida. And what we've seen here is the top doctor in the state of Florida needs to be able to really look at good data and scientific information, which he liked to say that he looked at, but be very pointed in the way that he guides Floridians through a pandemic and other health challenges that may come to our state. Senator Jones asked many questions about why the Department of Health has stopped putting the COVID dashboard up online, why we weren't getting reporting numbers for COVID as we were getting before. He couldn't answer those questions. Senator Cruz was asking different questions about not the COVID-19 pandemic, but other health disparities amongst minority groups, HIV, hepatitis. He would not answer very pointed questions. And so this was a waste of our time, again, beneath the dignity of the Senate on a time where he had already disrespected our colleagues, the Senate. And so we wanted to move on and get to the business of the day.
But the decision to walk out, how much of that is just political theater by the Democrats?
The Florida Senate Democrats are in this committee now are going to abstain, walk out, and come back when we have more business to attend to.
I don't think it's political theater. Walking out and allowing them to continue the dog and pony show, as it were, was what we needed to do to get through the business of the day. We know that all of our colleagues are no votes on this confirmation. We believe that he's dangerous. This is one of those frontline doctors who believe in passing around disinformation, who talks about, again, mask wearing being an extreme measure, who lied about treating COVID-19 patients at UCLA. This is not somebody who should be the top doctor in the third largest state in the country. This is a danger to Floridians everywhere. And we know that once we get to the floor, we will vote a no vote to confirm him and really work to show what he is, and that is a political mouthpiece for the governor.
What does that say about Governor DeSantis that this was his pick to be the state's top health official?
I think that this is a pick that is purely political, quite frankly. We saw as we were going into the pandemic, Dr. Rivke's was one of those picks that people expressed concerns about, but we were literally walking into the pandemic. And we saw glimmers of hope with Dr. Rivke's. I think everybody will remember one day in particular where he talked about the need to wear masks and that would extend for quite some time. He was then ripped off the dais and not allowed, quite frankly, to speak again. However, this pick has been out there very boisterously talking about some of the dis and misinformation as it relates to COVID-19, and that is dangerous.
Let's talk about another issue before the legislature. This is a ban on abortions after 15 weeks, including in cases of rape and incest.
As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse myself, I can't believe that we're in a place and in a time where we won't have some sort of exemption for what that is. At the end of the day, if you're a young girl, and you and I have talked about this before in the past, I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 during my sexual assault. Sometimes you don't have a regular period when you're that young, and they may not know. They may be afraid. In cases of incest, maybe they don't want to tell the other parent. We should be having that dialogue and conversation. And I'm very concerned, very, very deeply concerned as a survivor of sexual assault, that may not make its way into the final bill. And so we need to have people's voices heard. If you have a story to share, we'd love to hear from you, because we do need to make sure that everyone is represented. And again, these are stories that need to be told. And I think sometimes that helps bring people along in this process.
You were the victim of another crime more recently, in which images of you were sold, traded after being stolen from you. Very compromising images, intimate images. You've now tried to turn that into a piece of legislation that strengthens revenge porn laws and other aspects of the law that isn't, talk to me a little bit about that. Tell me what it is that the bill tries to do.
So after November the 12th, after dropping off my two kids at school, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing some work, and I got a text message to my phone that asked if this was Lauren Book. I said, yes, it was. Who was this? And said, somebody with a proposition for you. And then they sent me two topless photos of myself. And I panicked. I freaked out. It was very scary. This was an individual who's now been arrested, who's out on bond, who was trying to threaten, stalk, extort me and my family. I have now become the victim. Whoever thought in my life, after being a victim of child sexual abuse, been a victim of another sex crime, image-based sexual abuse. Images were stolen from me and my husband. They were created in something called deepfake technology, which if none of your viewers know, thank God. However, it is something where people can take your image or photo. If you have 3 pictures or more, you can make somebody do anything. And that is not a crime in our state. Stealing those images was not a crime. And we're working to fix that. You're right. We're going to make it so that you can't knowingly, willfully create and trade and sell those likenesses. This is cyber stalking. This is cyber trafficking. And we're going to work to close those loopholes. Another really important piece of this bill, as a survivor again of childhood sexual abuse and somebody that's worked in this space my entire life, we've worked to change the definition of child pornography because that would imply consent, and we know that a child can't give consent, and so we're calling that child sexual abuse images. This is happening to women and girls all throughout the state of Florida and the world. We know that there's a proliferation of this, of the 100,000 images of deepfakes of women and girls out there on the internet. It doubles every 6 months. And it's 90% of that is non-consensual sex being shown online of these young women and girls. And so we're working to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's something that you can never get back. I'll never be able to take this back. People have been buying, trading, selling my likeness without my consent. Again, thereby the cyber trafficking piece of this. A piece of pain and anguish I never, ever thought I would have to endure at this point in time in my life. But, working to fix that, because I believe that it's my responsibility. This is a state change, a state fix. This needs a federal fix, and we're going to continue to work on that because it's the platforms that bear some responsibility for it. And also having conversations, quite frankly, about victim blaming and what that is and what that looks like. Nobody should look at a victim of image-based sexual abuse or cyber trafficking and say, well, if you weren't so good looking, then you wouldn't have a problem. Or if you never took those images or pictures with you and your husband or of you, you wouldn't have a problem. I would never say to somebody, well, if you didn't have such a nice house, it wouldn't be burglarized. Or if you didn't have such a nice car, maybe it wouldn't get broken into. That is victim blaming at its worst. And we need to come to a place in a time that we live in a 21st century, understand that this is a piece of the reality and something that we need to put guardrails around.
You've said recently that if it wasn't for the fact that you had children, you might have actually considered taking your own life. Just talk a little bit about how devastating this was after you got that text back in November.
If I didn't have my children, if I didn't have my family, if I didn't have my colleagues, my friends, I definitely could see a place in a time where I would have ended my life. You go through, all of the pieces of blaming yourself, looking at what happened. And we've now spoken to families of women who did end their life. We've spoken to women who have had to endure terrible, horrible things online, stalking, image-based abuse, who went into substance abuse, really serious mental health challenges. And that is a very real reality. I understood that. Can you imagine your most intimate of intimate things that you never, ever were meant to share with anybody are now being bought, traded, and sold online without your consent? And there's nothing you can do about it. You don't know who did it. You don't know how anyone is ever going to find the person who did it. And there's nothing you can do. At the end of the day, getting these images taken off these websites has been quite a challenge, and something that we've continued to work for again and work towards, where we have to look federally at those pieces. If somebody just has a VPN, so a private network, they looked at who stole these things from me, and the servers that bounced to Russia and Sweden. I may never find the ultimate evil who stole these things from me, my family, but we're going to continue to fight because this is the 21st century, and it's a very real piece of reality, and it's something, and sometimes where the law needs to keep up with technology, and we simply haven't done that.
And far more common than people would understand or realize.
I had no idea, and I am a person who spends a great deal of time in this space. I had no idea this was happening. I had no idea this was an issue. Come to find out, it's not just across the state of Florida, the country, it's worldwide. The COVID-19 pandemic did create, I think, a larger proliferation of this type of crime when people just needed access to some of this material. I often say, Jim, and you've known me a very long time, and we've talked about, and my sexual abuse, my sexual assault, growing up, healing from that, making a difference. This was worse than that. And I say that because when I was a kid, in my childlike mind, I believed, not that it's true, but I believed that I had some little bit of control over the abuse that I was enduring. I didn't, but in my mind, I did. If I was good enough, if I didn't make a problem, I wouldn't, maybe my beating wouldn't be so bad, or the assault that day wouldn't take as long. In this case, I was sitting at my kitchen table, having just dropped off my kids, ready to go meet my brother's new baby, and my entire life was on the internet. I had no idea. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who did it. I don't know how to stop it. And it is a constant game of whack-a-mole. Every single day, something new, something different that somebody decides to post. Some of these images were created, right? That I have no control over at all, ever again, nothing. None of it is in my control. And I know this may surprise you, but I'm a little bit of a control freak, and that is a very difficult thing. And so this has been nothing I could ever imagine. And that's why I'm so thankful for the support of my family, of my colleagues, because I could not have survived it without them, because you're just trying to, at that moment, keep above water and get to the next moment in a crisis. And all of this was happening, during special session, and there was so many issues that went along with that. Just trying our best to wrap our mind around it and heal from it and fight back against it.
When we come back, the new Miami-Dade School Superintendent, Dr. Jose Dotris.